Morning, everyone. John, I forgot all about the visit that you made to Cincinnati. That really helped, connecting some of the dots. Okay, everyone. Delta was actually helpful as I flew down from Cincinnati. And on the napkin it says, ideas are best pursued with 280,000 horsepower engines. And I kept this little napkin. It's a great inspiration. And then I wrote underneath it, versus the 280,000 horsepower engines, the voice of the customer through structured listening, which to me is where the power is. So let me take you through some quick background. Number one, I'd like to encourage interaction. So if you folks have a question or you want to take exception to something I say, feel free to do it. I'd like more of an interactive approach. My wife and I have 3 sons, Matthew, David, and Timothy, all millennials. So I've actually had to listen to a bunch of millennial stuff over the last 35 years or so. I'm a piano player, which has actually helped me with my listening more than anything else. If I had to lose something, I'd rather lose my sight than my hearing. I don't know how architects feel about that, but I'd rather be able to hear than see. So music is a big part of my life, and it's a big part of my philosophy. University of Cincinnati. Anyone from the Midwest here? Anybody? University of Cincinnati has a pretty solid. It's called the College of Design, Architecture, and Planning, and I've had some unique connections with that school, lecturing, teaching, etc. And I had a really unique relationship with a fellow who was big into POE, post-occupancy evaluation, and also universal design. And he and I kind of connected on this idea of getting upstream, listening, so that when you get downstream, things make a little bit more sense. But as John said, my real focus is marketing and product development. So I'm a trained marketing, research, social science kind of a guy. I went to UC and then also to Michigan State for graduate school. So virtually everything I've worked on the last 30 years or so has something to do with marketing and or product development. And as he said, I've been in business for 27 years. My most favorite market, though, that I served is architecture and design. I've worked with all kinds of designers, industrial designers, medical device designers, automotive, but I really appreciate architecture, interior design, etc. I get a lot of personal joy out of that, and I see a great fit with me on chemistry. Chemistry, we've got good positive relationships. Synergy, I could actually bring something different to the table. So architects typically don't take classes on marketing research and social science kinds of things. So I was able to bring that to the table with this firm in Cincinnati. But the strategic idea, where we had some commonality related to, we really want our designs to reflect from the bottom up the voice of the people that we're trying to serve. Okay, so let's roll here. John mentioned this process actually turned into something called the Schoolhouse of Quality. And the most important word sitting there is how one voice built a better school. As you folks know, there's a bunch of disparate voices in the design of any kind of a building. You've got users, buyers, influencers, all kinds of different people. And you have to somehow balance all these voices so that we can design one thing. We're not designing 2 things, we're designing one thing. But it has to reflect all these different voices. So how you bring one voice together is tricky business. And you have to understand some concepts that relate to how to weight data, audiences, and so forth, so that when this comes together, it makes sense to people. Here's one thing I'd like you to, the main takeaway. When I was talking with Wendy, by the way, Wendy Johnson, I want to thank her for helping grease the skids for me to actually being here. The original title was Leading Through Listening, and I said, wait a minute here, it's not just listening, it's not mamby-pamby, loosey-goosey listening, it's structured listening, it's strategic listening, it's intentional listening. So if there was one thing I would have you take away from this, because I know you want to build your business, I would tell you that the mantra that I'd like you to walk out of here with is that structured listening will build your business. Ready? Let's say this together. Structured listening will build my business. And it's a upstream to downstream kind of phenomenon. You link them all together because there's it's process improvement, but it's also marketing. But at the bottom, the net effect of all this is we have to get to creativity. Creativity for me is the act of and response to listening. There's lots of definitions on what creativity is. This guy can draw, he can play the piano, he can do whatever. He or she can do a lot of different things that express creativity. But for me, creativity is the act of and response to listening. And when I talk to people, business people in particular that are trying to design a manufactured item and they hear this concept that creativity is listening, they really begin to connect with that thought. So they want to understand, well, where are you coming from, Steve, on what creativity is all about? In my opinion, I boil it down to these simple little words. It's the act of and response to structured listening. But this is hard work. And most people don't want to do it, frankly, because it's hard work. You know, in the big scheme of architectural process, I would typically be in the pre-design realm, okay? Think inverted pyramid, where, you know, it's broader up here. That's where I typically hang out. But the impact of the input, the insights that I'm developing and sharing with my architectural friends, it's actually influencing everything downstream. Here's something I thought you might find interesting. Deep right in the middle of the recession, 2010, IBM did one of the largest individual interview studies they've ever done. It was 1,500 executives from around the world, and they asked these people, what are the keys to leading an organization? This was basically like an open-ended question so people could respond any way that they wanted. And creativity was at the top of the pile. I think it was 55, 60% of the respondents actually said something about creativity. So think about that. This was in 2010, right in the middle of the recession, and people were thinking, you know, how to control costs, strategic planning, all kinds of other things, which are on the list, but creativity jumped off the page big time for 1,500 executives from around the world. Why? Why do we do structured listening? Because it shows empathy, and people want to know that you care. It builds trust. As a matter of fact, one of the first chapter in our Schoolhouse of Quality book talks about before we build anything, we're going to build trust. So I've actually used the process in helping my architectural friends to design trust. We design trust before we actually design a building. And it delivers solutions that people value, okay? You know how architects talk about warm, safe, and dry, right? I know you're all about that, and that's one of the reasons I like architects. I respect what you folks do. But it's also about delighting people and giving them something beyond their expectation. And in my opinion, you get to that by this structured listening process. And by the way, most of new product development, you're looking for this 15 to 20% incremental difference. It's not massive things. It's the cool factor. It's the wow factor that where people say, how in the heck did you come up with that idea? That is really awesome. And then you go back upstream and you see where it came from, and it's linked to specific issues and requirements and ideas that people had way upstream. So the benefits beyond why we should do this, here's the benefit to you folks, other than structured listening will build your business as far as I'm concerned, because I've actually seen this happen. These are some sub-benefits. It energizes productive team decision making. When you have the voice of the customer driving discussions, people love this because they can say, hey, do you remember when that guy was talking about X, Y, and Z? That was such an insightful thought. We need to remember that as we continue this process of designing this building. Provides fantastic stories for the perspective of others. I love the guy yesterday who talked about storytelling For me, it's story selling, by the way, because all these things add up to something powerful. And I've had all kinds of unbelievable stories that I could share with you on how, through the process of listening, it turned out, it ended in some fabulous product development results. Inspires excellent and unique design solutions. I've got many examples of how we would have never done it this way if we hadn't have done this structured listening process. In the school world, in Cincinnati, by the way, in terms of volume of stuff that I've had the chance to be a part of, it's been roughly $700 to $800 million worth of finished product, finished school product in particular, K to 12, higher ed, and so forth. And there's just hundreds of examples of things that are scattered around within these buildings that relate to the fact that we listened, and it ended up in this particular solution. So as John was talking, if you went through some of these schools, that they would be able to tell you these stories about how we got from A up here all the way down to Z, and it turned into something really cool. Presents the opportunity for competitive advantage. There's no question in my mind that when you have a process, you folks as architects, you're very process-driven, process and results-driven. When you have a process that delineates for the client how you're going to engage the users, the buyers, and the influencers, how you're going to do that, in not just a mamby-pamby, loosey-goosey listening way, but in a structured listening way, they will sit up and pay attention. They'll say, wait a minute here, this sounds really different to me. I've been there. I've been in these presentations with architects, and I've seen people's eyes like, wow, you can actually do that? Where have you guys been? So I don't know if this sounds revolutionary to you folks or old school or what, but most people don't think this way because it actually takes work. You have to strategize. You have to think this through. And finally, it sets up the ability to track progress against objectives. Now, when I talked about my friend from UC, he was into post-occupancy evaluation. I'm not saying that this technique specifically leads to that, but it helps you evaluate per the customer requirements, the way the customer talked about their building. Customers aren't necessarily going to talk about the cubic feet of airflow and that kind of thing, but they're going to talk about how they want to experience the building and the impression that it made as they drove up to it. They can actually articulate those kind of things. The point of getting the customer requirements and the voice of the customer identified upstream quantitatively, and I'm going to take you through the actual process here in a little bit. The fact that you do this upstream, you now can measure yourself downstream. So John, way back when we were inventing all this stuff, we actually presented at some AIA total quality management. I don't know if you remember those days where TQM was kind of the rage. Remember that? We actually made the rounds to some of these places because this whole way of thinking is kind of built into that mindset. Okay, but you can't track customer requirements if you don't identify them. You can talk about them, but if you don't have these things quantified upstream, you can't do diddly squat downstream in terms of measuring yourself against them. And some people might say, well, wait a minute, a building is going to last for 50 years or so. Why do I need to worry about measuring customer requirements downstream? Well, at least in the school world, these things get added to. They get renovated pretty quickly, like within a 5-7 year time frame. So now and we've done this, we go back to the original set of customer requirements, which don't change that much, by the way, once you identify them. Customer requirements are a solid foundational kind of a mindset. So we've used these customer requirements for renovations and additions, that sort of thing. That's what I'm talking about when I'm referring to tracking progress against objectives. Okay, group? Anybody? Questions? Comments? We loving this? Quick musical aside. I really enjoyed Mr. Savage's rendition of God Bless America last night. And his wife singing the Kate Smith rendition. And that song was brought to America in 1918 by Irving Berlin. And I believe January of this new year coming up is Mr. Savage's, it's either his 99th or his 100th birthday. I think that's kind of a cool piece of trivia. Wonder if he knows that. Sure he does, right? So let's get into this process. So I've got less than a half an hour, 35 minutes or so. Here's what I want to teach you, because you're actually getting some learning units today, correct? When you fill out the course piece of paper. These are the 4 things I'm going to share with you. And to really do the deeper dive on this, you have to call me and talk with me, which is an open-ended offer. And I'm going to be here till 3 o'clock before I get on Delta's flight back to Cincinnati. If you want to talk about this, I'd be more than happy to get together and show you even more detail, because I can't unpack this whole thing. This has taken me quite a while to invent all this stuff, but I wanted to give you the big chunks. So I'd like to teach you how to uncover customer requirements the way I would do it, the way I do it today. I just did this over the last year with a pretty serious new product development in the oil and gas industry, hanging out in Houston quite a bit. Teach architects how to quantify customer requirements. Okay? We have to quantify these things. We just can't write them on a piece of paper and think everything is going to be peachy. That won't work, because everything can't be equally important all at the same time. We have to teach architects how to analyze these customer requirements so you can gain some insight. See, it actually adds to your marketing and your business development. It's not just process improvement in designing a cooler building or a cooler experience within this building, but it actually helps with marketing as well. So remember this, it's steak and sizzle, okay? What I'm talking to you about today, it's steak and sizzle. There's something going on here that's process-oriented, and I know enough about the architectural process to be able to talk about it. And as I said, I'm basically hanging out upstream in the pre-design realm. But it comes downstream and influences everything all the way to the end. And then last is how do I actually apply these customer requirements? So let's see what happens here when I do this with you. In terms of the uncovering process, these are some ideas as I sat and thought, what do I need to share with these people in Florida? First of all, we have to identify the customer. One of my favorite books, everyone, is by this guy, Mac Makowitz. You know who he is? The Navy SEAL, the bald-headed dude, who had a show called Future Weapons. And he's written a book called Unleash the Warrior Within. He's got this little statement. He talks about targets, weapons, and movement. A Navy SEAL has a specific mission to go after specific people. And even though that's a military, some of us may not like that particular mission that they're on, but it's the same mindset relative to product development, marketing, etc. We have to identify who we're going after, okay? So who are these people? In my way of thinking, you have 3 broad audiences. They're payers, they're influencers, and or users of this built environment thing called a building. Okay? By the way, this can be applied to master planning, building level, department, functional area level, individual furniture, fixtures, and equipment level. I've done this, where we've taken it from the top all the way down into the unique mechanical, electrical, plumbing level. Okay? It has that kind of impact. If you're willing to go and do the hard work upstream of listening, structured listening, it can actually influence down to the detail. And in the process of doing this, you're setting yourself up for something I'll show you a little bit later. It's called the customer value path, or the logic trail. I've been in meetings where the public board members of this big school district say, what do we need those spaces for? Those little rooms between the rooms. And there was a whole logic trail behind how we even got there. And once this guy saw that, he backed off, because all he was looking at was square footages and how that equated to dollars. And it probably added up to millions. This was a big high school. And once he saw the logic trail, the customer value path logic trail, he backed down like right now. You have to have the rationale, everyone. Remember, great planning starts with initial foundational questions. You know that. You're all planners. So it's really that first question, that set of questions that we start asking that influences everything downstream. This is a tricky one. To the extent possible, you have to pursue unbiased, objective, blind, structured listening, okay? If the people that you're designing for, all the different audiences that you're designing for, if they know that you're the designer, I think they're going to have a jaundiced, biased view of what they want to share with you, okay? This is trickier in your world because your world is a fairly public world, not just public projects, but there are some things that we can do to kind of knock the edge off of the subjectivity of collecting information from people, making sure that the squeaky voice kind of a person doesn't have the total rule here, okay? But my basic principle is, to the extent possible, we need input, we need the voice of the customer requirements that are unbiased and blind. If that makes any sense, I hope it does. And we have to start with what are our listening objectives? Why are we even doing this? This is how every marketing research person would sit down. They would have in their proposals, it would say information objectives. What are we trying to understand here? So I've got some things I want to share with you on this and just a few more bullet points. But in general, just think of listening as upstream, midstream, downstream. Think of your total process you go through. And it's basically the same as any new product development process. It's upstream, midstream, downstream. And there are questions that have to get answered that relate to the voice of the customer. I'm not talking about the gazillions of questions that architects and constructors have to get answered along the way. And I know there's thousands of things that you folks have to deal with. I'm talking about the key customer requirements that have to be dealt with, okay? Now, this one's important. Think through, how do you actually want to land this plane? You can bring a plane in at a pretty steep angle, and it'll be a rough landing. You try to level that bad boy out, coming down at 250, 300 miles an hour. But if you come in real slow on a gradual degree, it's way more comfortable. So I'm sharing with you that this is how we do listening. We think this through. It's kind of like milk, mush, and meat. Okay? You don't feed meat to a baby. You give him or her some milk and then a little bit of mush, and then we move on to the meat. Same thing with the listening process and what kind of questions we're asking people. Don't feel like the architects that I've dealt with that really get this, that really understand where I'm personally coming from, they understand that basically what I'm trying to do for them is build in some patience where they can sit back and they can take this all in. They can sit here and take notes themselves as I'm doing the process of all these different steps and so forth, but they realize, oh, Steve is actually giving me some time to process what's important to these people, okay? And he's got a way that he's trying to do this. So I've worked with a lot of architects, but the ones that really get this, that don't have any built-in biases, if you will, they're saying, I see where we're going here. We're actually being patient. We're slowing the whole process down. You know, I'm all about plan and do, not plan and do. I'm not interested in 2 steps forward and 10 steps backwards. And if we do structured, strategic listening, I'm fairly confident that we're going to get everything we need to keep the process rolling forward in a productive way. And then see the comment there about qualitative methods. This is when we're way upstream. You've heard of focus groups, individual interviews, community forums. I've done all this stuff in different ways, and it takes some thinking. What's the best way to pull this off, okay? And by the way, when you start thinking about research and voice of the customer, we don't have to be dealing with big, massive sample sizes. I could prove to you how with a sample size of 30, 40, or 50, we can get some serious information, depending on how we collect the information and how we analyze it. But I have been a part of several efforts where it's been big sample sizes, but it had to be for a variety of reasons. But I don't want you to think that every structured listening process has to be some big, massive piece of marketing research to pull this off. You don't have to do it that way. And so last but not least on this piece of paper is or slide is using the best model for listening and identifying the initial upstream requirements, those initial juicy issues, these heartfelt issues that people have about how they want to. Now here's something for you, and I'm sure you thought this way, but you've probably never thought about how to put some quantification into these different approaches. So for instance, one model that I've used many times is the before, during, and after model. Pretty simple, but people can relate to this. So we're talking to them about a concept of a building. And we ask them, before you would ever use this place, before you'd ever drive onto the property, before you would, as you're driving by the property, what are the issues of importance to you? What would be your requirements? Now don't tell me how you would design it. I'm not interested in how, I'm talking as if you folks were a focus group or a community forum. Don't tell me how to design something. We're not there yet. All I want to know is what are your softer issues of importance as you, before you'd have to actually encounter the building. Yesterday I ran up Pelican Boulevard, and so I was very cognizant of this as I came out of this building down the ramp out here, and I was thinking about this, how they've actually brought people into the property and everything. And so there's some issues there that I see as I approach that. Okay, so that's the before. During, as you're actually using this thing called a building, what are the issues of importance to you? Now, obviously, all these have a certain particular context that we put people in so that they can relate to it. Before, during, and after. How about when you leave this building? Literally, as you're leaving, what are the issues of importance? So that's one model. Another model is the relationship model. I like this one a lot, especially in schools, because we have students, parents, teachers, administrators, all kinds of relationships. So I'd have a bunch of paper scattered around the room, and it would say teacher to student, student to student, student to parent, parent to teacher, parent to administrator. There's like 10 different relationships that actually have to be facilitated through this thing called a building. You just put those labels up on the wall, and then you bring some people together and you ask them, now as you think about this relationship, first of all, why is it important to you? You want people to emote a little bit, talk emotionally about why it's important, and then ask them the key question, what's important as you think about a fabulous relationship between the students and the teachers? And again, don't design anything for me, just tell me the underlying reason why something is important. By the way, that's the other little trick that, and it's actually on this one. See, four bullet point down. Ask why, follow-up questions. There's always at least 3 why questions. When somebody tries to give you the solution, you ask them, why did you say that? And then they'll give you another semi-solution. And then you say, no, why did you say that? You're basically trying to get to the root cause, the root heartfelt issue, which if I were an architect, if I were a designer, I would want to hear that more than anything else. See, they're not experts at designing things. They're experts at articulating and giving you their feelings, okay? So find the natural VOC, the voice of the customer. Find the natural voice. Don't try to translate it for them. Just a quirky little thing that I always do is I'll always start with verbs, action verbs. I'll ask people, now tell me if these were like short little goals or objectives. As you think about that teacher to student relationship, start with a verb and tell me what your specific issues would be. And they can do this. They can talk you through this, okay? That's just a little trick. These are tools and tricks of the trade, everyone. Every product that I've ever worked on, whether it's a building or a battery-operated ambulance cot or whatever it might be, there's always 25 to 30 and maybe as close to 50 requirements of the people that you're talking with. And if you give them some time to let this sink in, they can actually express the voice that's important to them. Those 25 to 30, that to me is where the real action is. And it brings tremendous benefit downstream for you folks, okay? Even though I know that there's thousands of decisions that you have to make, what you're trying to do is set the tone here with the proper process. Use an inverted pyramid. Think broad to specific, okay? Just another little trick. Here's the biggie for you folks, and I'm not down on architects at all, because I love my architect friends. Eliminate presumptive loaded questions. Hey, I've got this great idea. What do you think of my great idea? That doesn't work with people. Here's a little sidebar. We live in America, which is the most sophisticated consumer behavior driven country in the world. So I live in Cincinnati, which is headquarters of this little company called Procter & Gamble. They have 300 brands, okay? And they're constantly talking to people about products and services. That's just one company. We've got Fortune 500 companies doing this all of the time. People have the chance to express themselves all of the time, whether it's in focus groups or individual interviews or online surveys. We are heavily saturated with the opportunity to give our voice, let our voice be known. By the way, I don't think our government does this very well. We could design a new government, a new democratic government right here in this room with the voice of the customer. I think it'd be really cool. And you folks can all be on the cabinet. It'll be a big monster cabinet, John. Because they did the big macro thing. They didn't bring it down to the county by county level enough. There's 3,100 counties in our country. And if you look at that data, that's where the action is. They were actually right in the big national polls, I believe. Hillary did, I believe, win by 2 to 3 percentage points. But that, as you know, that's not the way we do it. We do the Electoral College thing, which I think is really wise as you think about the whole thing and the fruited plain from Ohio across to California. I left out West Virginia and a few other states, but anyway, don't ask presumptive loaded questions. People in this country, they can see right through this, okay? They'll pick up on this right away. I'll give you a quick, John reminded me of something I wanted to share with you. This particular firm in Cincinnati, which is a top flight school architectural firm. It's one of the larger ones in the whole country. And their competition had a really nice, it's my favorite public school district in all of Ohio. There's 610 public school districts. And they had this one district as a client, and they couldn't help this client get a $30 million bond issue passed because they weren't doing this. That they weren't doing structured listening. They were doing, in my opinion, they were doing more of this stuff here, this presumptive listening, okay? This new process came along because they were frustrated. They said, we know people want some change around here. They want some new facilities, and they've got the money and so forth and so on, but they're not going to give it to you unless they know that you're listening. So we actually did this, and it went from a $30 million to a $60 million project, and they passed it with flying colors. So when we listen, I believe the customer will respond, but we have to be able to prove to them that we've got a serious process underneath this, because they've been through this. They see all this stuff. Let's see here, everyone. Now this last thought, merchandise the process, connecting the dots for customers and reminding them how structured listening leads to specific, satisfying design solutions. This is a key thought for you, and this is why I wanted you to repeat with me. Structured listening will build your business, okay? It's a process, but it's also merchandising, because as you do this process and you get downstream, if you have any sharp marketing people in your firms, on your teams, they're picking up on this, and they're seeing that, oh, okay, we did this listening. I can write about that. I can do what this guy yesterday was talking about. I can start telling some stories about how we actually did this. You can merchandise the process. This is how the big consumer packaged goods people do it. They go out and they do their research, they design the product, they introduce the product, and they remind you that it was your voice that actually helped design this process or this product or service. So that's making you feel good. And if the product and the service, you're looking at it saying, this is awesome. I wonder how they did that. That's because they listened to you. Does this make any sense to you people, I hope? Okay, now you can't read this very well, but it's the visual that matters, and the bullet point words. Teach architects how to quantify. So we just went from how to uncover. So now we've uncovered 25 to 50 upstream, totally awesome customer requirements across people that are using, paying for, and or influencing this thing called a building. And again, remember, it could be master planning, building, it could be any of these combinations. It doesn't matter to me personally. It's just the context that we put all this in, okay? So what I'm sharing with you here is there's the most important point on this slide. And you folks are more educated than I am, but this is the big idea of this slide. Focus is the third bullet point. Focus on importance and performance, okay? In my opinion, all design comes down to understanding and delivering on these two dimensions. What's important to you, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, member, user, buyer, influencer, what's important to you, and how well has this requirement actually been delivered in other physical built environments that you've been a part of, okay? They can actually answer these questions. So what you're looking at here on the left side, this is just this actually isn't an architectural example, but I'm just showing you how this happened to be a written survey that I designed for a different project. But I wanted you to see the columns that are empty off to the right. That's where people would write on a scale of 7 to 1. 7 is vitally important to me. 1 is not at all important. So we're using the whole scale, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1. How important is it to you that this particular master plan, building, et cetera, would actually deliver on this requirement? Okay, go ahead and give me your score, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1. You're coming down that column, that's first column, that's blank. That's the importance column. Second column is on a different scale of 7 to 1. 7 is excellent, 1 is poor. How well would you say this requirement has actually been dealt with in other environments in which you've had a chance to live, work, operate, etc.? In that case, 7 is, as I just said, excellent to poor. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1. Now, most important thing, Mr. or Mrs. Respondent out there, be discriminating, please. Use the whole scale. Just like when you're doing your surveys here, you'll notice they're using a 5-point agreement scale to have you evaluate the presenters. I personally like 7-point scales. I have some reasons for that. There's actually 150 different scales out there in the world of marketing research, by the way. And there's debate on the pluses and minuses of all these different kind of scales. You've seen these kind of scales. If you've been to a hospital, if you've been to a restaurant, anywhere, you're doing this all the time. So people know how to do this. But they're normally not doing it in the context of the built environment, okay? So we get these things filled out, and then we've done this either through, remember, the uncovering the requirements, that was a bunch of different qualitative techniques where we were doing focus groups, community forums, etc. But now we're quantifying this stuff because, as I say here, everything can't be critically important all at the same time. But everything is relatively important all at the same time. And that's the point of my little visual here. This is called a quadrant chart, where the x-axis is importance and the y-axis is performance, okay? So this is where I'd have to sit down and show you how I do this. But very quickly, let's assume we had a survey, 100 respondents, and they've done all of the ratings on all the 100 issues, or whatever the 25, 30 issues are. So I've got average scores now. I've got mean scores on importance and performance. Once I have these scores, I can map them, okay? Where you take the midpoint of the x-axis and the midpoint of the y-axis, and you map them on this little guy here. Now remember, there's nothing that's unimportant. It's a matter of relative importance. Why would I ever ask you a question on something that would be unimportant to you? That's another little trick, another little nuance in the world of the way I think. We never ask questions that are unimportant. It's a matter of relative importance. And that's why you use scales. By the way, quick marketing research 101. There's 4 different types of data. There's nominal data, yes, no, ordinal data, where you rank something, interval data, where you're rating something, like this, and then there's ratio data, basically where it's a 0 to 100% scale, or maybe even infinite scale. That's a trickier one. But the interval data is where there's a lot of power. There's more power as you come down these different types of data. Okay, if you just go out and ask yes/no questions, there's little power in yes/no answers. You don't know the nuances of what these people are thinking about. But if you ask rating kinds of questions, and then you analyze this stuff with something like this is powerful. I hope you're picking up on this. Hope you're picking up what I'm trying to put down, as one of my sons would say. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? David would say. David went to DAP, by the way, at UC in cinematography. And he's our left and right side brain son. So he wants to know if I'm picking up what he's putting down. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? On how to analyze the requirements of the people you're trying to serve. It's importance against performance. When you do that, here are the definitions. If something is relatively important to me and relatively performing well, it's what I call a support. That's the blue. Okay? Now you can talk about these, you can present these to your clients, and they'll say, this is really cool. I didn't realize that those are things that people think are relatively important, and they think we're doing a relatively good job. On the other hand, look at the guys in the red category, which I call an upgrade. These are issues of relatively high importance and relatively low performance. Okay? Those are the red flags going up the flagpole. And you're saying, wow, we have to really do some cool design to get to the bottom of these things. Then you've got what I call shift, which is relatively less important and relatively higher performance. Some people would call that overkill. Why are you spending a lot of time on that? It's less important and we're performing really well. So, hey architects, this does come down to your time, energy, and money, by the way. Okay? That's what this is all about. If you really study the new product development, the bigger story, which if you saw my bookshelves in my office, I've got tons of proceedings from big-time product development products, missiles, cars, all kinds of stuff. It's all about bringing something to market faster, better, and cheaper. And I don't see any difference in your world. I want to bring something to market faster, better, and less expensively. That's what all of new product development is all about. If you're going to be in the world-class realm of product development. And then the gray area is what I call track. It's relatively less important on the x-axis, and we're doing relatively less well on performance. Okay? And you can actually put these on the chart, okay? And I'll show you what I do with this information. You can actually map it there if you wanted to. I don't see that as a big deal. It's just a matter of labeling everything so you know where they fall. But just as a quick example, from the work that I've done in the school world, back in the, I don't know, like 90 to 2000, technology was everything in schools. It was the big topic on how we're going to get technology in the classrooms and what it's going to be all about, blah, 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 blah. So you'd see a lot of issues, these underlying issues that relate to how the teachers want to use technology for the sake of their students and the parents, et cetera. You'd see these things hanging out down in the gray area. Guess what happens after you deliver on it? Then it moves over. This is why tracking customer requirements is important, because they would then move up. They could actually become more important, more important and, no, I'm sorry, what I meant to say was technology was in the red. It was in the red, everyone. It was less, it was more important, relatively more important off to the right, and a relatively low performer. That's what I meant to say. And then it moves over after you deliver on it, okay? and it actually becomes less of importance, moving off to the left, and it would be a green actually. It would say, okay, we've had enough of this technology stuff, let's move on to something else. Like, how about security? How are you securing, the front entryway with all the issues that we have in our country relative to that, okay? Did I just confuse you? The technology was down in the red. It was really important, and we weren't delivering as well as the teachers wanted. Then as we delivered, we actually got this stuff in the classrooms, it then shifts over and up. Okay, does that make sense? Sorry, I threw you for a loop there. But this is all about the how to quantify things and how to analyze things. So this chart here is just a little bit more. So now, if we had a chance to do some of this together, this is just showing you how I map the customer requirements on the left side. That's just 10 of them, but you'd have a much bigger chart, everyone, 25, 30, 50 things. And the colors relate to my quadrant chart, okay? I'm all about coloring things and visualizing things. And it's the juxtaposition of the x-axis versus the y-axis. But this is where you gain insight. It's one thing, there's a difference between data and information, right? Data, information, insight. Data, information, insight. So now we've got insight from the data that we collected way upstream as we qualitatively, quantitatively, and then analyze the customer requirements. Now this little guy here, this is what John was talking about. I've got 7 minutes, John. So see this little chart to the left, everyone? This is what's called a QFD chart, Quality Function Deployment. And all I want you to know is that this is like the stuff that's happening back in the kitchen, all right? I wouldn't necessarily share this with communities and other folks that are actually participating in this. They may not want to see this. It's a little bit too granular, but this is where the action is. Because this is the chart off to the left has got the customer requirements on the left side. See how you can see how they're slightly colored. Those are the same colors of the bar chart in the previous slide, okay? And then in your world of designing something, so the very first slide that you saw, I talk about customer-driven and team-led. I'm all about, team decision-making, working with architects, that sort of thing. But we bring this information into the design process with the architects. And now we're actually going to design together, where the architects are leading the design process, but they're using the voice of the customer off to the left to actually begin to identify design concepts that will attend or address these requirements off to the left. So this little chart could be this big, okay? And the stuff on the left is the only thing that's on the piece of paper. The stuff on the top that you're seeing there, and that it's actually also referred to as the House of Quality. If you Google this, you'll see all kinds of stuff on House of Quality, QFD. By the way, this quick history lesson, this came post-World War II. The Japanese invented this stuff. But they were tutored by people like Edwards Deming, Joseph Duran. I don't know if you know some of these guys who are passed away, 100-plus-year-old guys. They were some of the men and women that went over to some of the countries that were part of World War II. We helped reindustrialize them. But they were already thinking about some of this stuff. And so I've met the people that have invented this, the Japanese folks. And they used to do all this by hand. It's just a disciplined approach. This is all computerized stuff, okay? But in your world of architecture, requirements for customer off to the left, the stuff on the top is blank. We're now designing to the requirements of the customer. It's serious brainstorming. It's serious ideation. It's your charrette, okay? But a different kind of charrette. And I've been a part of charrette, so I know what that's all about. This is a different kind. But it's totally driven by the voice of the customer. And it's slightly rigorous. Okay, so you have to be in shape to be able to do this. Your brain has got to be ready to rock and roll. Okay, and you can't give people too much of this, because thinking, I don't know about you, but thinking takes more energy than chainsawing. I'm a chainsawer. I'm more tired after thinking and leading a group like this than I am after doing 3 hours of chainsawing. Thinking is a rigorous thing. So But when you uncover these requirements across the top, and we agree as a group, architects leading this, and then we fit the ideas. That's the point of the middle of the chart. See the little symbols? We're now fitting the design concepts to the customer requirements, and that's what the symbols mean in the middle. Bottom line is, that, by the way, the research, the voice of the customer research is off to the far right. You can't see it, but it's all embedded in this. I think I shared with Amy yesterday, this is voodoo, okay? This is my mathematical, but it makes total sense, voodoo. You have to see it up close and personal to really appreciate what this is all about. But what we're trying to do is, we're trying to figure out how much energy should be put against certain kinds of design concepts, which is what all innovation is all about. We can't innovate necessarily on every little inky-dinky thing that's going to be built into this car, because we have to bring it to market. At some point, we got to bring this new model year to market. So what things should we spend our time on where we're really innovating? I've worked with architects where we design curved windows instead of 45-degree angle windows. And that takes a lot of energy to think this through and talk to window manufacturers. But if you saw the upstream benefit of that, the teachers, they see some really cool benefits of having kids sit in a little corner window. Final thought for you. Bill Murray in Ghostbusters. Remember that movie? There's this lady lying in front of him. It's on YouTube, and you can see it. He's saying some really insensitive healthcare questions to her, okay? And this guy says, "Why'd you ask that question?" And he said, "Back off. I'm a scientist," okay? So I'd like you folks to be able to say, "Back off. I'm a structured listening architect," all right? In case you get challenged, because I know you get challenged, right? Everything isn't smooth sailing.